You asked me about the most highly publicized case in my early career. Well, there were a couple of them, but the Diana Barson case was one of them. I had actually taken a leave from my practice to go work for Jimmy Carter on his campaign and in the transition government. And then after he was sworn in, I came home a few days after that, and I started my practice again. That was 77. And it was rough coming back, restarting. I'd already had a pretty successful go of it, but the phone didn't ring. And then one day, I was sitting at a place here called the Avalon Drug Store, which is kind of it's near a very wealthy area called River Oaks. It was my favorite place to go, and I was drinking a cup of coffee, and I got a call. This is 1977, or 78 rather, and I went into the phone booth, and it was my secretary. And she said that I'd gotten a call from someone whose ex-wife was in big trouble. And I didn't know who that was. And we sat back down and everybody was talking about this murder case. A woman had shot, killed, and dismembered her husband. Well, I got to the office and the man came down. It turned out to be the ex-husband of the woman accused of the crime. To be specific, she had taken the body parts in 5 garbage bags out to California, where her parents had a ranch, and she was so guilt-ridden, she was going to bury the body parts, and instead she started to kill herself, and at that moment, the police arrived and arrested her. Well, the entire city knew about the case, and they thought she was guilty, and the facts were pretty ugly. And then I talked to her at great length about what had happened. So let me just tell you about the great lesson I learned about jury selection and winning the case from the get-go. I started out, my client was diminutive, about 4'11", and I started out in jury selection, and I asked if anybody knew her husband. He was 6'4", he was a weightlifter. Did you see him at the gym? And so I created the picture of the disparate size. I decided that she was entitled to self-defense and had acted in self-defense, although she didn't fit the definition perfectly, the elements perfectly. For instance, self-defense requires you to retreat first to try to avoid using lethal, in this case, lethal force. So then I asked, and it wasn't a given back then. This was a different time. I asked if anyone on that panel had reservations about a woman who would use lethal force against her husband, even in self-defense, and a bunch of hands shot up. So I got a lot of good information. And then there were 100 panelists there because it was so highly publicized. And then I heard a voice in the back, way in the back, someone crying, sobbing, a woman loudly. And a guy on one end of the row that this woman was on pointed toward her. And I don't know what it was, good luck or my mother telling me to show good manners. I got a cup of water, and this woman was never going to get on the jury. So I got a cup of water and I took it back to her. And I said, "Are you all right?" And she stood up and in a voice the entire panel heard said, pointing to my client, she said, "If my daughter had done what your client did, she'd be alive today." At that moment, I had a psychological change of venue. At that moment, the jury was able, through this analogy to this woman's case, this woman's daughter's case, understand there were two sides to that kind of story and create great empathy. And what I learned was, let the panelists talk during jury selection. Make them either the metaphor for your case. Mr. Jones, have you ever been betrayed, stabbed in the back? Oh, yes, I have. And then he's telling the story of your client who got cheated in a business deal. It was a very valuable lesson. The judge was Judge Piggy Hughes. And I remember the jury went out and he said they're going to give her probation because in Texas, the jury sentences as well as makes a finding of guilt or innocence. And Judge Hughes said they're going to find her guilty and they're going to give her probation. He was wrong. And by the way, so was my mentor, Racehorse Haynes. whose injunction to me before the trial was, David, they'll understand her killing him, but they don't like, in Texas, we don't like people messing with the body. And they came back and acquitted her. And my career really took off.